Hey, good morning. Welcome. It is the Exiles podcast on the 15th of July, live from Divina Italian Cafe, corner of Acadian and Perkins in Baton Rouge, the beautiful state capital. So glad to have you with us. Bill is taking a morning off. My guest today is the coroner of East Baton Rouge Parish, Dr. William Beau Clark. Pulled out the frame to get you in there. Good to have you with us again today, Dr. Clark. How are you?
I'm well.
Wait a minute. Try that again.
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Boom. I thought we had a malfunction for a second there. The only malfunction we had was me. We're going to talk about something very serious. Everything about your job is serious. But we have had a lot of people dying from various causes here in East Baton Rouge Parish. I mean, this has been a pretty grim year so far.
Yeah, it's been a record year, 2020 so far, especially with the work we do at the coroner's office. And I'm glad you stated first that we need to remind, when we talk statistics and numbers, that we don't forget that this is related to the tragic loss of life. But in all manners of death, with the exception of suicide, we've seen increased numbers. We've seen increased numbers related to homicides, increased numbers related to overdoses, increased numbers related to natural death that don't include COVID, and of course the COVID pandemic. So we've been quite busy.
COVID, do you think the pandemic is correlative in some of these increased numbers?
Yes, I think it does play a role. I think it plays a role in a lot of things that we've seen in 2020 so far, because it's really changed the landscape and the environment in all kinds of ways. And so certainly during the quarantine, people might have ignored symptoms that we're having of natural disease process, which might have exacerbated those things. Certainly the stress of the pandemic could have led to things like depression or even increased substance abuse. So I think it has played a role in certainly in some of the numbers we've seen.
Let's get into violence and crime. We've seen, we just talked yesterday on a television program about the increase in gunshots, non-fatal gunshots, but we've also had a pretty profound spike in murders in our parish.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers with me today, but the numbers are definitely up this year. They're accessible on our website. We keep a running total for the public to see there. But certainly, yes, we've had an increased number of homicides this year. Which again is another record-breaking year in East Baton Rouge Parish, and we're only in the 7th month, so that's concerning.
And again, do you think the COVID shutdown is correlative of some of these been domestic violence homicides, or?
Most of them have been. There have been a few domestics, and we see that regularly, usually annually. But a lot of them are usually related to narcotics trafficking.
So gangs and drug activity.
Correct.
And things like that. Okay, we brought up narcotics. Let's go right for it.
Right. So I mean,
opioids.
I mean, the opioid epidemic didn't go away just because we had a COVID pandemic. It was still present. I think one of the things that we lost track of as a society is we stopped talking about opioids because we were talking so much about the COVID pandemic. In 2019, we had 128 total overdose deaths in the parish. That year we saw a tremendous upward trend of deaths related to fentanyl and deaths related to heroin and fentanyl. So far in 2020, in the first 6 months, we've had 112 total deaths with 21 pending toxicology. So that's 134 in the first 6 months of the year. We've already beaten last year's total record. And we're still seeing the same trends of increased fentanyl deaths, increased heroin and fentanyl deaths.
Now, I know that your job as the coroner and the medical examiner is not the why, but do you have any speculation as to why we're seeing?
So I think partially has to do with when the major dealers that bring drugs into this country, a lot of that was shut down because of the quarantine that we saw occur across the United States, and therefore at the local level they tend to begin to cut the supply of drugs even further than what they have, meaning they adulterate it with other substances.
Dangerous substances?
Dangerous substances, and that's why we've seen this uptake of heroin plus fentanyl. Either by themselves is incredibly dangerous. You put the two together, it's astronomically dangerous. And so now you start to see someone trying to make their supply last, the dealer, and in doing so, they're mixing these drugs together so that they can sell a product and continue to deal drugs, which is what they do.
But if they're killing off their customer base?
Well, like we've always said through this entire opiate epidemic, the customer base is so huge because there's so many people that are suffering from substance abuse related
But
to opioids.
they don't care if they're killing off their
No,
customers.
there's people people waiting to fill the gap.
I don't want to get you in trouble just by voicing your opinion, but is law enforcement doing an adequate job of trying to combat this?
Well, so law enforcement was put under the same constraints that we had, right, when it came to the pandemic, which was contact with the community. So, for example, a simple traffic stop for running a red light became a huge issue at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic because we didn't really understand the virulence of the virus, and so because of that, then how aggressive are we being with our law enforcement tactics? I'm unsure, but if we're being less aggressive because we're worried about COVID, then does that give it an opportunity for the drug dealing to still occur? Maybe so.
I don't want to get into finger pointing, but it just seems like no matter what we do, we can't really seem to make any inroads.
Right. Well, it's so multifaceted. I mean, you look at what's happening simply with one topic like COVID, or you look at the opioid epidemic, and there's so many angles to this. It just takes a lot of time to help the situation.
I was thinking on the way in of a question I wanted to ask you about opioids. There are a few clinics here in Baton Rouge that treat opioid addiction. As a matter of fact, I've done radio commercials for one that treats opioid addiction, and they say they can help you kick the opioids. What do you know about the drugs that they use to help you get off of opioids?
So there's two ways that two things you need to do to utilize to treat opioid addiction. Number one has to do with how we treat your mind with cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's through the psychiatrist and the psychologist and the social workers, and we work on why are you addicted to begin with, and how that works. But also you got to remember you're physically addicted to the medication or to the opioid.
So you need some kind of a supplicant?
Yeah, something that helps you physically get unaddicted. And one of the most common drugs that's been around for a long time is methadone. There are newer versions of that drug, or similar drugs to that, like Suboxone. And these are drugs that basically you get on to get off of the other opioids that are just temporary, because you eventually should get off the methadone and the Suboxone as well, where you're really living in an environment that you're opioid free.
I'm old enough to remember in the 70s when there was a big heroin thing. It was just heroin at the time. But there were a lot of people, celebrities and things, were dying of heroin overdoses, and they came along with methadone, and they would put people, like in New York City, they'd be putting junkies on, I'm sorry if that's a disrespectful term, I just, but they put them on methadone maintenance.
Right.
But then what they'd find out was they'd have people that were addicted to the methadone.
Correct. Right. So the problem
And
there
so
was,
they were merely, so like the county was providing their drugs for the drug habit.
right. What they failed to do, obviously, is to make sure that they were in a program to deal with the cognitive side, what was going on in their brain, and come to the realization that they were going to eventually get off the methadone. The methadone was not to permanently supplement their heroin addiction, but it was going to be present there to help them physically become unaddicted.
So theoretically, if you can't break the mental cycle of I need something,
Correct.
then you're just going to be swapping one drug for another.
Right. So you have to do both, or the whole process is moved.
Interesting. Has that shown any improvement in our area of helping people that you're aware of?
The interesting thing, of course, as a coroner, I don't get to hear the positive stories of how people are helped by it unless I'm told about it.
You only get the bad news.
I only get the bad news because of what I do. But I want to believe out there that there are a lot of people that are invested in the opioid epidemic, both in a local, state, and federal level, that we are making some inroads to help people that need it.
With all the tragic deaths we have, whether it be from using opioids or from violent crime or from domestic crime, which is often violent crime, but you know what I'm saying. Do you have enough staff to handle what you're faced with?
Our staff was we were at a level prior to 2020 that we could manage the volume of work for the size parish we have. However, 2020 has put us to the test in the sense of that we've seen an increase in overall volume. And that's not only just from the COVID pandemic, but it has to do with all of the categories. We've actually added an extra death investigator during this time frame to simply help manage that volume. And the end of the year, by the end of the year when we look at the numbers, that will be when it really tells whether we need more or if we're at the right amount of staff.
But with the parish fiscal picture the way it is, if you need more resources, are you going to be able to get them?
Right. So we have to go to the parish and ask the parish governing authority to fund those positions because they are necessary. I mean, we have to respond in these cases. We are a first responding agency in the realm of work that we do, just like law enforcement, EMS, and fire.
Where do you see your department in, say, 5 years?
So I think the parish is going to continue to grow, and as the parish grows, we're going to be required to. They're going to call on us to do more work. I mean, the work of the coroner, no matter what parish you're in the state of Louisiana, is directly proportional to the size of its population. And East Baton Rouge Parish is the largest parish. We have about 450,000 people, and so as that number grows, and certainly you look at the types of death you're dealing with. You take a very violent parish like Orleans Parish, the more unnatural death that occurs, the more work the coroner has. Natural death for us is fairly easy to investigate because they're usually medical records and clinical histories that we can rely on, versus when you have to collect forensic evidence in a homicide or forensic evidence in an overdose. That does require manpower and a lot more energy on the part of the office.
This may be a somewhat frivolous question, but on television you see shows that are about the ME, the coroner,
Right.
and they often have an episode where it's a mystery.
Right.
That you've wound up with a decedent, and you can't tell immediately what was the cause of death. Was it a natural death? Was it a murder? Have you ever experienced that sort of thing?
Right. So we typically, we have our rate of what we call undetermined deaths is very low. It's less than 1%. National average is about 4%.
Really?
So we're even better than the national average. We, for the most part, can determine why somebody died. Now, sometimes what may be confusing is their manner of death. If we're debating between whether something was accidental or suicidal, or something was accidental or homicidal. Sometimes the picture is not perfect enough for us to make that call, and we'll call it undetermined. But our undetermined rate is very low. Another common question we get is, how many unidentified bodies do you have? We have 0. We get phone calls all the time asking, if there are a bunch of unidentified bodies in our coolers, and I think that's probably the result of maybe even larger cities like New York City or Los Angeles may have an issue with that, or what people hear or see on television. But we're able to identify everyone that has come through the office in the 8 years now.
Well, I'm reminded as you spoke about that chilling image. It was an aerial photograph from New York City where they had unidentifieds that they were burying in plain white coffins in a mass grave.
Right.
And yeah, but if you count that, there's like 9.
Right.
Which in a city the size of New York, 9
out of 12 million.
I mean, I'm sorry that 12 people were not known, but 9 out of 12 million people. Yeah, you got to look at that as shocking, but it's not that big a deal. So you have absolutely 0 unidentified.
0 unidentified.
How long does it usually take to identify?
Well, sometimes we spend up to a year trying to identify someone. In a rare case, usually we can identify someone immediately. If you're called to the scene of a death for a gentleman, and John Smith is his name, and you're in John Smith's house, and it's John Smith's wife that says that's John Smith, and he's got John Smith's ID in his pocket and his picture on the mantle.
Seems pretty open and shut.
It's pretty obvious.
But it's when again, these are unpleasant terms, when you have to deal with that body dump.
Right.
Where someone's committed a murder, they dumped the body, and they might have wanted to conceal the identity.
Right. So we can rely on scientific things such as fingerprinting. Believe it or not, DNA is kind of a last resort. I know we hear a lot about that on these forensic shows about what did the DNA show, we simply start with the easiest, fastest things, which is we take your fingerprints. If you've been fingerprinted before you're in the system, then we can get a match that way. Sometimes if we cannot obtain fingerprints, say like in a case where the body has been burned, we can use dental records. So we have a forensic odontologist on staff that does comparisons for us, and we do that about 6 times a year. But if we have to go to DNA, we will.
LSU Faces Lab, have they been useful to you?
Yeah, we work with Dr. Listy in the lab, and Mary before Dr. Listy was there.
Mary was incredible.
Absolutely.
I love that woman.
Yeah, great.
Mary Mannheim, just to help you all out. But she was the former head of the Faces Lab, and just a pistol of a woman.
The bone lady. That's
the
they'll
bone lady.
know what they're talking about.
So Basically, you have the unenviable job, though. You've got to deal with everybody.
Right. Everything. So things that come through the front door of the coroner's office there's never anything happy. I mean, someone's died, someone's having a mental health crisis, or someone's been sexually assaulted, and so we're continually dealing with those tragedies in the community, and so we do it as a group to provide a service to help people in their most time of need.
I wanted to ask your opinion, just your opinion as a professional, on the post-mortem. Is it always necessary, or is it, or if the loved ones, the survivors, don't want a post-mortem, should that be their privilege or their right?
So the post-mortem is only necessary if the cause of death is not evident, or there's a necessity to collect forensic evidence. For example, if someone's been shot and they have a bullet inside of them, that projectile is forensic evidence that matches to a gun that may be later used in a criminal case. Outside of that, a post-mortem exam is not necessary, specifically if we have a robust amount of medical records, meaning the whole person's medical chart, all the disease processes they suffered their entire life. If they've been put on hospice for a terminal illness, then clearly it's the terminal illness that has caused their death. So to do the autopsy of the post-mortem is actually more of a rarity than it is on every case.
That was where my mind was going. I actually know someone who took some heat because she elected not to have her husband PM'd because, as she said, what difference would it make knowing exactly what it was?
And we have enough. There's enough scientific evidence that we can, and we do this day in and day out. My guys are specifically trained that we can analyze a case, and even before we do an autopsy, a lot of times in those questionable cases, we know what we're going to find. It's a matter of confirming that.
We're talking with the East Baton Rouge Parish Coroner, and he also is you are an accredited licensed ER physician as well, right? So either way, coming or going, you can take care of them. But Dr. William Beau Clark, what is the one thing, if you, I hate to use the word wish list, but if you could go to the parish and say, I need this and I need it now?
What I think so in 2002, the parish built a medical forensic facility here in East Baton Rouge Parish. And you got to put yourself in the mindset of what happened in 2002. Well, not what happened in 2002, but what happened in 2005, which was Katrina. And that's when we saw a tremendous uptick in the population. So the building itself and the structure was built for a capacity of a parish that was about 230 to 300,000 people. That's what we were. The same can be said of our roadways. If you look around, we're built for that kind of infrastructure. All of a sudden, we get thrust into being the largest parish in the state, and now even this year in 2020, we're beginning to outgrow our capacity in our office. So I'm afraid in the near future, there might be an addition that may be necessary in that office. Now, having said that, I know the sheriff has talked in the past about needing a new jail, and this person needs that. So it's challenging, because all these entities are very vital to our community in providing the services that they do. But it will be something that probably will come into the future as a necessity.
One last thing before I let you go, Dr. Clark, I want to talk about the mental health issues, because that is also under your purview. If someone comes to you and they think maybe a relative or something needs observation, I mean, that's the process, is they come to you to get this person placed under observation and evaluation.
That's correct. It's called an order of protective custody. So they come to us and they file an affidavit that they think that their loved one or their friend or their neighbor, whoever they've observed, is a danger to themselves, and we can have that person picked up and evaluated. And it's really the safety net that exists in Louisiana in the mental health system.
Without telling any tales out of school, what is are we in a good mental health place right now, or a very bad mental health place?
I think our mental health place has not seemed to change this year as compared to previous years, but previous years have been bad. So I'm not trying to say that it's better. It's simply maintaining the same level. I will say that during the pandemic, when we had the quarantine, a lot of outpatient services were shut down. It wasn't just elective surgeries. I mean, obviously, people couldn't even go get their high blood pressure checked.
Right.
And so that affected the mental health community as well. They couldn't go to their regular appointment. So we did see some decompensation that occurred during that time and an uptick in admissions because of that. But now that those things are starting to come back online, hopefully we can get back into a scenario where treating someone outpatient, which is the most preferred method for their mental illness, becomes more available than having them inpatient.
We've passed the Bridge Center. We put that to a vote of the people. The funding is in place. Are you okay with the pace at which that's taking shape? Because it seems like it's taking forever.
Right. So it's moving at the pace of government, is what I like to refer
Which is
to
glacial.
It as. Right. But it's no different than any other governmental agency that you see, that just things take time and they move slowly. But it is my understanding that there will be patient care rendered at that facility by the end of this year, and then full force into 2020.
And that is still intended to be at the Baton Rouge General campus?
Well, it's actually, the building that they have leased or rented, I'm not sure the correct term, is just across the street from the Mid-City campus.
Okay.
And they're going through the needed some, it
Little
needed to
build
be
out?
build out for patient care purposes.
And you said they could be treating by the end of this year?
By the end of this year, and definitely into 2020.
See, I think that this is going to help us out a great deal. We've got people who are obviously not in their right mind, and a lot of them wind up in jail if they encounter police.
Well, and I'll tell you, one thing, just from a geographic standpoint, the fact that it's located right in the middle of the parish is good for everybody, right? Because this is a center that is going to be designed for every citizen of the parish who's in need of mental health services.
Well, Dr. Clark, we appreciate your time, and thanks for coming and having a cup of coffee with us. And we look forward to having you on again and on the television program as well.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
So we'll be in touch. Dr. William Beau Clark is the coroner of East Baton Rouge Parish. This is the music we play when I'm about to take a coffee break, okay? We're going to grab a cup of Joe. And when we return in just a minute with part 2, political analyst Roy Fletcher will join us. We're going to talk about how the things are shaping up for fall elections in Louisiana. That's coming up in a moment on Exiles.